In a crowded, glittering concert hall, a world-famous pianist thought he was about to humiliate a young, blind boy, inviting him to play just for fun. What he didn't know was that this 16-year-old carried a gift so extraordinary, so powerful, that the first note he played would stop the entire room in its tracks. Tonight, you're about to witness the moment a boy who had lost everything turned an arrogant challenge into a jaw-dropping lesson that left even the greatest pianist speechless. Get ready. This isn't just a story about music, it's about courage, genius, and proving that true talent can never be ignored. The grand hall of the Lincoln Arts Center sparkled under crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the whispers of New York's musical elite. Patrons in evening gowns and tuxedos sipped champagne, exchanging polite laughter and subtle glances of superiority. At the center of it all, Vincent Sterling, the world-renowned pianist, adjusted his Armani tuxedo and allowed a smug smile to stretch across his face. At 42, he was a legend, his name synonymous with genius, fame, and sold-out tour. Tonight, he was in his element. Or so he thought. A young boy stood nervously at the edge of the stage. 16-year-old David Thompson, blind since a tragic accident 8 years ago, clutched his white cane as if it were a lifeline. He had been brought here by his music teacher, who had managed, with great effort, to secure 2 tickets to this exclusive charity recital. No one among the glittering crowd had expected him to be anything more than an awkward figure in the background. "Hey, kid," Vincent called, his tone dripping with condescension. "Why don't you play something for us? Happy birthday, perhaps?" His laughter echoed through the hall, mingling with the quiet chuckles of the audience. David's lips pressed together, his calm demeanor unshaken. No one knew the hours he spent in the basement of a neighborhood church, fingers dancing over a borrowed keyboard for 8 hours a day. No one knew that he could replicate entire symphonies after hearing them just once, even at the age of 3. And no one realized that in this very moment, he was mentally mapping every note, every nuance of arrogance and expectation in the room. "I prefer Bach," David said, his voice serene but commanding. Vincent laughed aloud, a full, almost theatrical chuckle. "Bach? You must be joking. Which piece could a child like you possibly play?" "Partita No. 2 in C minor," David replied without hesitation. "But perhaps it's too advanced for this audience." The room fell silent, a silence so profound that the ticking of the ornate hall clock seemed deafening. Something about the boy's quiet confidence unsettled even the most composed guests. A few shifted in their seats, sensing that they were about to witness more than a simple recital. They were about to watch a spectacle of defiance and genius. Vincent's smile faltered. He had intended this as a joke, a moment of light humiliation to amuse his audience and assert his dominance. Yet here stood a boy who dared to challenge him, whose calm eyes and precise words spoke volumes. "Do you realize what you're suggesting?" Vincent said sharply, regaining some composure. "This piece is extraordinarily complex, technically and emotionally. Are you certain you can handle it?" David did not flinch. "I've prepared for this. Every note, every phrase. But perhaps you should show me first how it's played, Dr. Sterling, so I can understand your interpretation." The famous pianist, sensing a challenge he hadn't anticipated, strode to the piano with exaggerated flair. His fingers danced across the keys, a flawless performance, each note technically perfect but cold, lacking the soul that true mastery requires. The audience applauded politely, many nodding in approval, yet a faint unease lingered in the air. Something told them this was only the beginning. David approached the piano, leaving his king carefully beside the bench. He paused, turning slightly to the audience. "Has anyone here ever lost everything they loved in a single moment? Had to rebuild your soul note by note?" His words carried the weight of lived experience, the authority of one who had endured and transformed pain into purpose. The silence shifted. It was no longer merely social discomfort but recognition. A recognition that this boy was about to do something extraordinary. Vincent's confident posture wavered. He had anticipated ridicule, not a profound demonstration of poise and intelligence. For David, every insult, every pitying glance, every condescending word from the audience and from Vincent himself had been fuel. His fingers hovered above the keys, not trembling, but poised like a surgeon before a delicate operation. The journey from tragedy to talent had led him to this moment, and he would seize it fully. "Very well," Vincent said, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. "Show us then, boy, what you can do. Impress us, if you can." David's blind eyes seemed to pierce through the room. "I intend to, but first, let me show you the difference between playing notes and playing music." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some exchanged puzzled glances, while others were offended at what they perceived as the boy's audacity. Vincent, white-knuckled, realized he had underestimated the challenge before him. The stage was set. The audience held its collective breath. In that charged silence, David's presence became more than a challenge, it became a statement. And in the stillness of the grand hall, the first stirrings of musical revolution were about to begin. David sat at the piano, hands hovering just above the keys. The hall was silent, save for the faint hum of anticipation. Every eye was on him, yet he did not see them. He saw only the music, the notes etched into his mind over years of tireless practice. He had memorized every nuance, every stylistic choice of the masters, and tonight, he would transform mere notes into a story the audience would never forget. Vincent Sterling, standing beside him, radiated impatience. "Remember, this piece is for seasoned performers, not children. Don't embarrass yourself or worse, us," he sneered, attempting to regain control of the evening. But David remained calm. Each word, each gesture of Vincent only strengthened his resolve. He had faced far greater obstacles than the arrogance of a single man. And now the entire elite audience was about to witness the fruit of that struggle. The first notes of Partita No. 2 in C minor filled the hall. They were familiar yet entirely transformed. Where Vincent's rendition had been precise but cold, David's interpretation carried the weight of lived pain. Every phrase resonated with emotion, the denial, the anger, the despair that comes from losing everything at once. Guests leaned forward in their seats, suddenly aware that they were not merely listening, they were being led through the boy's soul. Vincent frowned, his confidence cracking. He had expected technical errors, hesitation, perhaps nervous fingers. Instead, David's mastery was flawless, each note deliberate, each chord rich with depth. The audience was captivated, some even audibly moved. Margaret Rothschild, whose earlier disdain had been obvious, blinked back tears, unable to hide the shock in her eyes. As the second movement unfolded, David played with fire. Anger and frustration poured through his fingers, a silent confrontation with a world that had underestimated him for 16 years. He did not play for applause, for approval, or for pity. He played for truth. Vincent, watching every keystroke, felt a chill run down his spine. Every minute of preparation, every act of hubris he had relied on, was being dismantled by this blind boy's genius. David paused briefly between movements, turning slightly toward the audience. "This isn't just music," he said softly, yet with authority. "It is the story of loss and survival, of transformation. Bach composed this for grief, for the moments when the world seems unbearably cruel. Every note must reflect not just technique, but life itself." Even the most hardened critics in the room were captivated. The applause that had been polite and restrained before had vanished. There was only silence, a reverent pause as David prepared to continue. The final movement began. It was meant to convey acceptance, transcendence, the quiet strength that comes after suffering. David's fingers danced across the keys, every movement precise yet organic, merging intellect with raw emotion. The audience was spellbound. Tears ran down cheeks that had not shown emotion for decades. The most privileged patrons of New York's elite, who had come expecting amusement or condescension, were witnessing a musical miracle. Vincent's jaw tightened. He had studied music for decades, yet here was a boy who had taught himself, who had turned tragedy into artistry, surpassing everything Vincent had ever achieved. Each phrase David played corrected the mistakes in Vincent's earlier performance, exposing the mechanical coldness of decades of fame. Every note was alive, every pause intentional, every crescendo a testament to resilience. Dr. Harrison Webb, conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, leaned forward, astonished. "I've heard countless prodigies," he whispered to his neighbor, "but I've never witnessed such emotional depth. Not in 40 years of listening." Margaret Rothschild, once skeptical and scornful, now sat in awe. Her earlier judgment was replaced by a mixture of humility and awe. Even Patricia Wells, the foundation director, was visibly shaken. The boy's performance was not just a display of talent, it was a revelation of the human spirit, a lesson in empathy and perseverance. Vincent, for all his training and acclaim, was speechless. The boy he had attempted to humiliate was dismantling everything Vincent had built, not with confrontation, but with art. Each note seemed to whisper, "Talent, heart, and dedication cannot be crushed by arrogance or privilege." As the final chords resonated and faded into the hallowed silence, David rested his hands gently on the keys. He did not rise in triumph. There was no smugness, no arrogance. He had shared his story, his soul, and in doing so, transcended the confines of the hall, leaving an imprint that would last a lifetime. The audience erupted not merely in applause, but in awe, tears, and standing ovation. People who had come expecting spectacle had instead experienced a revelation. For Vincent Sterling, it was a moment of reckoning. His years of fame, his calculated arrogance, and the social dominance he wielded so effortlessly, all seemed meaningless in the face of raw, unbridled genius and the strength of a life forged in adversity. Deborah Thompson, sitting in the fifth row, could barely contain her pride. She had watched her nephew endure pain, practice until his hands bled, study Braille scores and recordings late into the night. Tonight, the world was finally witnessing the truth she had always known. David Thompson was extraordinary, in ways far beyond technical skill. The final notes of David's Partita No. 2 lingered in the Lincoln Arts Center, hanging in the air like sacred echoes. Silence reigned, not awkward or polite, but reverent, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary had just unfolded. For the first time that evening, Vincent Sterling felt the crushing weight of his own arrogance. Every calculated smirk, every condescending word, every attempt to assert superiority had been exposed and dismantled by a 16-year-old boy who had nothing but courage, resilience, and genius on his side. David rose slowly from the piano, his movements calm, precise, almost regal. There was no boastful triumph, no need to gloat. He had shared the story of his life through music, and the audience, even the most privileged and skeptical, understood. Tears glistened on the cheeks of patrons who had arrived expecting amusement or polite entertainment. Margaret Rothschild, who had earlier mocked him, now wept openly. Patricia Wells' face reflected disbelief and shame. Even Dr. Harrison Webb, one of the most discerning conductors in the country, was visibly moved, whispering under his breath, "Talent like this comes only once in a generation." Vincent Sterling, standing frozen near the piano, could barely form words. His entire career, built on precision, technique, and reputation, seemed hollow compared to the living, breathing art he had just witnessed. He had tried to humiliate, to assert his dominance over the boy, yet now he saw the magnitude of his own failure. David's music had not just surpassed him, it had transcended everything Vincent had thought himself capable of. The applause erupted, a wave of admiration, awe, and recognition. It wasn't just about David's technical skill, it was about his spirit, his resilience, his ability to transform pain into breathtaking art. The room rose in a standing ovation that lasted minutes, the kind of collective reverence reserved for moments that touch the soul. David, calm and dignified, acknowledged the audience with a subtle nod. He did not seek fame or validation. He had already said everything through his music. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Vincent approached David with trembling hands. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced with awe, respect, and a tinge of shame. "Thank you for showing me what I could never teach," he admitted quietly, grasping David's hand. "You've reminded me, music is not about recognition or status. It's about truth." In the months that followed, David's life transformed. News of his performance went viral, capturing hearts around the world. Scholarship offers poured in, and by the age of 17, he became the youngest student in the history of the prestigious Juilliard School to receive a full scholarship. Dr. Harrison Webb personally ensured that David received mentorship from the best instructors, while Margaret Rothschild, once a skeptic, established a foundation to discover and nurture other overlooked musical prodigies from underprivileged communities. David continued to practice diligently, his mornings now spent overlooking Central Park instead of the dim basement of the neighborhood church. Yet he never forgot his roots. Every performance, every note, carried the memory of struggle, of perseverance, and of the transformative power of music. He didn't play to impress, he played to inspire, to connect, to show the world that true talent cannot be measured by privilege or prejudice. Vincent Sterling, in contrast, faced a harsh reckoning. Contracts were canceled, tour postponed, and critics questioned not only his technique but his humanity. Once revered in elite circles, he found himself isolated, a reminder that arrogance and cruelty cannot coexist with genuine artistry. Music critics wrote, "Sterling plays the right notes, but the soul we witnessed in that boy is absent." Even private lessons could not restore the prestige he had lost. Years later, David performed at Carnegie Hall, a sold-out audience including celebrities, critics, and patrons who had once doubted him. The same partita no. 2, the one that had rewritten his destiny, echoed through the hall, but this time, he played not to prove himself, but to honor the journey that had brought him here, the pain, the practice, the perseverance, and the triumph over prejudice. Standing before the microphone after the final note, David addressed the audience. Music belongs to no one. It transcends race, class, and circumstance. It exists to connect human hearts and remind us of our shared humanity. Talent finds its way, even in the face of adversity, and true artistry cannot be silenced by ignorance or privilege. The audience erupted into a 15-minute ovation. Tears flowed freely, and for many, it was a moment of revelation, a lesson in humility, compassion, and the unyielding power of talent forged through struggle. David's first album, released 2 years later, became the best-selling classical music record of the decade. He continued to establish programs for young musicians from underserved communities, ensuring that others would not face the same obstacles he had overcome. Vincent Sterling remained a cautionary tale, a reminder that arrogance and prejudice, no matter how expertly disguised, will ultimately crumble in the face of true genius. David Thompson's story became legend, celebrated not only for his prodigious talent but for the deeper truth it revealed, that perseverance, humility, and courage are the greatest instruments any artist can possess. And as he always told his students, the best revenge against those who doubt you is not destruction, it's creating something so extraordinary they cannot ignore it. The blind boy, who had once been underestimated, humiliated, and overlooked, had shown the world that greatness knows no boundaries, and in doing so, he had rewritten the rules of what it means to be truly extraordinary. David Thompson's journey reminds us that true talent cannot be silenced, and greatness often emerges from the most unexpected places. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and let the world know that perseverance beats prejudice every time. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of courage, genius, and triumph against all odds. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone rise above impossible odds? Let us know.